Thank you, Madam Speaker. The government is spending an enormous amount of money on subsidies to various manufacturers involved in batteries here in Canada. Over $40 billion is being spent on these subsidies. So this subsidy plan will cost every single Canadian family about $3,000. Over $40 billion is being spent in total. That is $3,000 per family on this particular business subsidy program. And Conservatives are committed to always standing up for workers, which is why we have asked for clarity from the government about whether or not there are protections in the contracts, the subsidy contracts that they signed with companies for Canadian workers. Will Canadian workers actually benefit from this enormous outlay of taxpayer money? $3,000 per Canadian family, they would like to know, and they would like to know how much workers are going to benefit. And the Parliament Secretary is already eager to respond clearly. He's saying lots. He's saying they're going to benefit. Well, what we have asked for, quite simply, is that the government show its work, that they release these contracts to the public so we can know the impacts. The particular genesis for this demand is that we have found out that actually the companies involved are going to be hiring a large number of foreign replacement workers. So over $40 billion in Canadian taxpayers' money, and the Parliament Secretary seems to think this is funny. It's not funny. Over $40 billion in taxpayers' money, and money being used not to employ Canadian workers, but to hire foreign replacement workers who are going to come to Canada to do the job. So that's concerning, obviously. Did these contracts include protections for Canadian workers? Did they include guarantees for jobs for Canadians? We would like to know, because if the government left that out, if they just said we're going to give tens of billions of dollars to these companies, and we don't actually know if or how much Canadians are going to benefit, well, that would be seriously troubling. Which is why, again, we have insisted that we want to actually see these contracts. But consistently at committee, Liberals have been filibustering. They've been filibustering in the Government Operations Committee in order to block the release of these contracts. Now, for a while, we had all opposition parties, Conservative, Bloc, and NDP, standing together, prepared to vote in favor of ordering the production of these contracts. Liberals were against it. They were filibustering to block the release of these contracts. But then, tragically, we had a flip-flop from the NDP. Rather than standing with workers, as they like to say they do, the NDP flip-flopped and betrayed workers. So they said, actually, we don't need to see the contracts anymore. Shameful betrayal of workers from the NDP under pressure from their colleagues in the costly corrupt cover-up coalition. The Liberals put a little bit of pressure on their friends in the NDP with a little bit of filibustering. It wasn't even a very long filibuster, Madam Speaker, and I would know. It wasn't even a very long filibuster. And the NDP buckled under pressure. They betrayed workers. Simply because of a little bit of pressure from their colleagues in the costly corrupt cover-up coalition. The only party that will stand consistently with workers in the House of Commons is the Conservative Party. So my question to the Parliamentary Secretary, and I hope we get an answer, rather than more of the kind of unrelated bluster that we often get from the government when asking direct questions, I hope we get a direct answer. What did the government offer the NDP, their colleagues in the costly cover-up coalition, to get them to change their position and flip-flop and betray workers? And why won't they release the contracts?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, I suspect it had a lot to do with common sense. You know, the Conservatives like to talk about common sense, and I suspect the NDP, upon reflection and applying common sense, they came to the conclusion that what the Conservatives and the Bloc coalition was proposing maybe wasn't in the best interest of workers. I think that's a possible scenario. I would suggest that the member, you know, when he talks about releasing contracts or the details, you know, I think of the Volkswagen contract. Again, as a government, we recognize the green transition. We recognize things like climate change. We recognize that in order to be able to provide the good quality middle-class jobs, that we have to be prepared to invest in certain industries in a very real and tangible way. ironically, Madam Speaker, we're not the only government that has made that decision, because we also see progressive Conservative Doug Ford also entering into agreements and using taxpayer dollars, as we have used, Madam Speaker, in order to support and enhance an industry that's going to provide career, middle-class, good jobs well into the future for future generations of Canadians, Madam Speaker. Something in which the Conservative Party opposes. I wonder if the member opposite has asked his good friend Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, the Progressive Conservative, for a copy of the agreement. If not, why not, Madam Speaker? I wonder if Doug Ford has actually provided that information to the member opposite, Madam Speaker. But I know the Conservatives are trying to find out some way in order to be critical of everything and anything the Government of Canada does, at no expense, Madam Speaker, even if it means doing the opposite in terms of what it is the member just finished talking about. When he talks about workers and the best interests of workers, seriously? At the end of the day, Madam Speaker, whether it's Stellantis or Volkswagen, we're talking about thousands of jobs. How can he possibly imagine that that's not in the best interest, not only of those direct jobs, but about the tens of thousands of other indirect jobs, Madam Speaker? And he's concerned that the province of Ontario, progressive Conservative province of Ontario, and the Liberals at the national level have worked together with private industry in order to secure good, solid, middle-class jobs for future generations of Canadians. And the Federal Conservative Party says, whoa, but it's true to form in the sense that the National Conservative Party today is, as I say, that MAGA right. Where we see this extreme right that believes that government doesn't have a role to play in things of this nature, Madam Speaker. That they don't believe that government should be assisting or subsidizing or whatever mega terms that they want to come up with, Madam Speaker. We on this side of the House recognize that as the climate changes, climate change is real today, that there is a responsibility of government to think ahead. And that's why, Madam Speaker, we have good, sound policies to support, a transition that's going to see more green type of jobs, which will attract, Madam Speaker, I would suggest to you, even more jobs into the future. This puts Canada well placed into the future on this issue.
Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As predicted, the Parliamentary Secretary did not even come close to attempting to answer the question. Now, he said, oh, this is a great deal. These are great contracts. This is a great investment. Our question is quite clear, Madam Speaker. What is in these contracts for workers? And how we can know what's in these contracts for workers is if the contracts are released. If the government thinks they've done great work, release the contracts. Show your work, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, what they're saying is we did great work on these contracts. There's great opportunities for workers, but we can't show you them. We can't show people what's actually going to be in there or not in there for workers. And that is, may I say, rather suspicious. Which is why Conservatives are saying we want to see what's in these contracts for workers, so release the contracts. Now, Liberals have been consistent. They're always in favor of cover-ups. I'll give them that. They're consistent. They never want the public to see anything. But the NDP have flip-flopped and betrayed workers. Why the flip-flop?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the member wants to know what is in the contract. What's in the contract is the opportunity for an industry to excel, to allow Canada to have a major footprint in the whole area of battery productions for electric vehicles. The other side needs to wake up, and many would say smell the coffee, Madam Speaker, but I'm not a coffee drinker myself. But I can tell you, there's a lot of good things that are going to come out of this contract, out of this agreement in which the provincial Conservative government of Ontario and the federal government, Madam Speaker, us, here in Ottawa, by having this agreement with companies like Stellantis and Volkswagen, We are creating tens of thousands of direct jobs. In terms of indirect jobs, Madam Speaker, it's even more than that. And the footprint that we're putting into place is going to speak volumes in terms of the potential growth of the industry.